Hi, I'm Charles Lindsay. This is the Field Station 4. I'm at the Beach Museum, Kansas State University. It is 2020. And I'd like to tell you about some of the works in the show. It is a privilege to be here and to realize these works and show new works. So this is what I live for, so come along. This is called the Yakhorn computer. This is late 60s, early 70s computer, which I salvaged. Take a look here. All the original parts intact there, heavy-duty circuits, and I have fixed Yakhorns to it, sort of antennas. There's a Tibetan artifact theme going on in this particular show. So we have this computer sitting on these cases, which I use in my field station exhibitions. I have salvaged these. These cases were all used to take fragile equipment to Iraq and Afghanistan in the wars there, and they come back and I've salvaged them. And I believe this piece is going to be in the collection of the Beach Museum, which is very exciting. So one of the things that I'm doing is repurposing scientific equipment and also artifacts, as you'll see shortly, and creating juxtapositions. So I was educated as an exploration geologist, and I love the aesthetics of scientific research, especially field research. I worked in the Canadian Arctic, and then I continued to be around field stations at NASA Ames, for example, and in the Costa Rican rainforest. So it's a motif that I appreciate and that I'm then monkeying with in my own work. So come on inside. This work is called the Capsule. There are actually two of these I've made. We have one in the museum here. The original use for this piece of gear was in the biotech industry. It's called a chromatography column. One of the things that would have occurred in here is that pathogens would have been confronted with drugs, so it's for drug testing. I've repurposed it with an industrial UV light which illuminates rare fluorescent mineral samples that I collected in Greenland at a very interesting complex, the Ilamasa complex, which is where a igneous intrusion rose through a dolomitic structure, which of course is coral reef to begin with, and then the dirty mineralization around that donut where the igneous intrusion came up resulted in strange and wonderful fluorescent minerals. Part of that deposit has uranium in it, and so by referencing that location on Earth, we get into some interesting geopolitical conversations. This is part of what my work is doing, hopefully, is creating these points of interest that might at first seem disparate, but then become conflated, brought together in the field station itself. I pulled out the pump that was in the original chromatography column, put a speaker there. There's a soundtrack running, which is built from field recordings I've made, so audio samples that I've made in the field of wildlife, monkeys, birds, whales, all kinds of things, but then I like to process them so that the sounds become something other than what you think, so that you might hear something and for a second go, that's a no, that's not a monkey, what is that? And the moment where we question our internal pattern recognizer is very interesting to me. That moment where we go, wait a minute, that's not what I think it is. I think that's a gift and an opportunity. And in fact, if our brains were being fMRI imaged in those moments, they would light up, because that's the moment where we are trying to figure out what's going on. The sound you're hearing here runs through this circuit, and this circuit converts the audio into this flashing blue LED. So the structure of the sound is represented in this light. So you'll see if you hear a heavy sound, what's called an attack, it picks up the gak gak, an attack, and then lights up like this. So it's a way of animating the sound further and potentially implying some ideas about life. Where does life begin? How did it arise or arrive on Earth? And so a lot of these ideas are addressed in this work. So this is one of my devices. This is an assemblage built in the case, so this artwork travels. One of the things I'm doing with these is the idea of creating artworks that are rapidly deployable. That's language, of course, out of military vernacular. But it's the idea that one of these things could be shipped somewhere as an artwork and open and do what it does. This is a 19th century Tibetan bronze. This is Mahakala. And one aspect of that deity that I find very interesting is the idea that it represents blackness, and black being that which absorbs all colors, the idea being that all truth is collapsed in that. It's also an interesting, or offers interesting ideas about time through the Tibetan philosophy. And while I wouldn't call myself a Buddhist, I've been very interested by Buddhist teachings, and I'm very interested in the artwork, the traditional arts of Tibet in particular. And so this is a way to bring this in. In the video screen, which is obviously connected to the idol through this computer, is experiments I made with weather balloons at Craters of the Moon National Monument, one of my favorite geographies on Earth, where I go to hike and observe nature and do some of these wacky experiments. There's incredible lichen growing there, as you see. And then another repeating motif in a number of my works, which is here, is this emo, and that's this emergency off. And I like the idea that the emergency off switch, by the way, is the exact same switch as you see on a lot of equipment at NASA. But in my works, the emergency off actually does nothing at all. So this work is, I call this my lava pillow piece. It's built in a custom crate, very much influenced by design by these government-issued cases here. So when you study geology, obviously you study time. And relatively large-scale time compared to the way most humans think about time in their daily lives. So there are a couple elements happening here. In geologic terms, there's a kind of lava that's called pillow lava because of the way it cools and forms. It famously occurs in Hawaii in these basalt flows. And rather than being a pillow lava, this is a lava pillow. And this is connected to horseshoe crabs, which have been aluminized, coated in alumina. These are wafers, circuits, printed. These are sort of decade-old circuits at this point. And then one of the other elements is this countdown clock, 10-digit digital countdown clock, and these are another motif that appears in a lot of my work. I worked with a coder, Jack Kalish, to create these clocks where the passage of time is determined aesthetically. So in other words, as we're working with it and he's coding, I would take a point where the rate of change is the way I want to see it aesthetically. We would lock that. So it's really monkeying with time. I mean, it's monkeying with this passage of time. And then we did the math on this, and it turns out that if it doesn't lose power, it takes 31 years to zero out. Obviously, a countdown clock loops into a lot of ideas that are tropes in science fiction, whether it's the doomsday clock or the Armageddon clock or something. And in many ways, I see the work I'm doing in the installations as science fiction theaters. They're presented very much in that way. You also see here again is my emo switch, which was also in the Tibetan piece. So that's the emergency off. And this is really a nod to a kind of humor, because I'm imagining, wouldn't it be great if there was artworks that you didn't like and you could hit an emergency off switch? There's a lot of things in life which would benefit from emergency off switches. So this work is called The Crab Cage. I conceived of this and built it at the Rauschenberg residency in Captiva, Florida. That's an artist residency that's now at what was Robert Rauschenberg's studio, and an amazing privilege to spend time there. And I had picked up some of these horseshoe crabs in the mangroves, the carapaces. They were already dead. And one of the things that happens at the Rauschenberg residency is you're in a position to learn techniques you don't already work with, so I learned gold leafing as one of the things I was doing. So I was gold leafing these basically just for fun. But horseshoe crabs, of course, they're amazing looking things. They look alien or dinosaur. In fact, they're considered living dinosaurs because they've been on Earth unchanged for something like 450 million years. So as with a number of the elements in the show, these things connect to different ways of thinking about time, from very finite time to very long period of time. In this case, we have 7 of these horseshoe crabs, and then they have lights underneath and a computer that's driving patterns. So what's happening here is that I'm using what might be thought of as drum machine patterns to drive the lights, and they're randomized so that they're not just fixed patterns like a drum machine, but they're really like song development. So a beat is established, a rhythm, a complexity develops, and then it falls away. And that all happens in 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So one of the things that I'm addressing with that is concepts about synesthesia. So that's like tasting colors, seeing sounds, so on. And so we have this go along, and you know, I work at the SETI Institute. I'm interested in ideas about communication, interspecies communications, communications with ET. And so this is really referencing that. It's as though, what if, symbolically or literally, the horseshoe crabs were trying to tell us something, but we couldn't understand that language. So this is thinking about ideas of what is language, how much information is inherent in things that we see as simple patterns. So I'm exploring that. There's a point at which the song, the visual song, ends and the light goes on underneath. The crabs go quiet, almost as though there's a predator below them. And then I have surveillance cameras in real time that are watching this, and this is running here. And this is built to receive 4 wireless surveillance cameras, but we only have 2. So when this small computer is looking for the other 2, we have a kind of glitch, which I find very interesting aesthetically, and conceptually this glitch that you're seeing here I also find very interesting, because it's the computer looking for information where there isn't any. And that's something that humans do, is we make up stories about things that we perceive that don't exist, and conversely we make false stories about things that do exist. And so this territory of not knowing and what we do with not knowing in the context or under the aesthetics of a laboratory, of a scientific experiment, I think is very interesting. So the other thing that is in the crab cage here is a 15th century Tibetan panel, a painted panel, a rare and amazing artifact which I acquired from a Croatian climber who had been in the Himalaya. And so one, this is just a breathtaking piece of art and a spectacular thing to live with. And so I'm recontextualizing that actual artifact in this device here. So the crab's 450 million years old. The artifact, this painting from Tibet, is from the 15th century. The monastery that is alleged to come out of Drepung was built in the 1420s. And you have this amazing zoomorphic and animal imagery and so forth on there. And then we also have this microphone, which is picking up sounds in the space of the audience, and then merging it with an audio loop created from my field recordings of wildlife, not unlike the piece in the background I spoke with before. So it's processed. So you're hearing surf, and you're hearing shrimp, mostly aquatic, oceanic sounds, and then the voices of the audience will come in delayed, looped, and processed a bit. So again, I'm playing with ideas, experimenting with ideas about time and space. You know, where are we at the time where we think we're here? Well, some of these things. It's kind of visual poetry. You know, it's a theater, and so the theater is activated by the audience. I don't have ideas that I want you to think or share with me. I'm more creating a space where a viewer might develop their own ideas and their own impressions. Let me tell you about the cases that make up the field station. I was looking for unusual frames to show my carbon photographs in, and on eBay, which is where I do a lot of salvaging. I also go to salvage yards in Silicon Valley and aerospace salvage yards and so on. Not rusty equipment salvage yards. I like the salvage yards where things are shiny. But anyway, I bought one of these cases because when you open them, it seemed to me to be a very interesting frame, also compared to traditional photographic framing. They were pennies on the dollar. And then, like a lot of what I salvage, I acquire it, I purchase it because of aesthetic interest, and then I learn about these things afterwards, whether it's a chromatography column or I purchased a missile guidance system on eBay that was made for NASA in the 70s, turned it into one of my devices. So these cases here, I purchased one and was very interested in it, and then went back to the salvager that had them and said, you know, do you have any more? And he basically said, son, I've got a lot more. So I went to his warehouse, and when I saw them all together, I realized it was architecture. It was almost like a styrofoam igloo or something, so that then in my spaces I could create actual buildings within the museum environment, and so that contextualizing was very interesting. So these particular cases were used to take Humvee transfer cases. That's the part of the transmission that's under the vehicle. When roadside bombs would go off in Afghanistan or Iraq, it would blow up the transmission, and so this took the replacement parts for that. And while my work isn't really about the military or politics per se, I'm definitely interested in the history of the objects. They could be aerospace, they could be Tibetan objects from a monastery, they could be, in this case, used in the military, and then of course they've been dramatically repurposed. And so I have cases in many formats at this point. Some have been used by the Coast Guard, some have been used by the Israeli military. And so these are building blocks for the art spaces that I'm developing, these kind of theaters for the absurd, or theaters for science fiction, or these places that I'm developing. Now you'll see down here, coming out of the wall here of the beach museum space, are these bundles of fiber optic cables. Fiber optic cables, of course, used in telecommunications. Again, very interesting. This is the hardware of telecommunications, of communicating. And so I've also salvaged these. Aesthetically, they're pretty interesting. I'm told that the curators' children like these very much and like to monkey around with them. Again, you see the monkey, Ham the astrochimp, stencil showing up on a number of the cases. And Ham was the first primate in space in 1961. I got an original photo, again on eBay, and then I converted that photo into that stencil. And the cases have different stencils. They have their original government stencils, and then I've altered them with my stencils that are nonsensical and otherwise. Of course, all these cases contain artwork, and the cases are built to last a very long time, so perhaps somebody somewhere a long time from now will open these up and find a discovery in them. You know, it's art making. Some of this work might last centuries, maybe some of it will last longer. And so there's something about that that's quite interesting in this territory of working with concepts of time, is that for an artist, something that can happen is that we're making a volley into the future. I mean, these things that I've built are not just built for the moment of my own discovery and exploration, but they're also these things that are volleyed into some unknown future where maybe they just become landfill, or maybe they become something curious, or maybe we've been bombed back to the Stone Age and those future Stone Agers are looking at this stuff. Who knows? But I think this is very interesting territory. It's speculative fiction manifest, and I think that's a good way to think about this space.